The silk of the wedding dress, a scandalous white banner of my impending doom, was heavy and cold, plastered to my legs by the deluge. It was saturated with the dark, clinging mud of the O'Sullivan estate grounds. Every muscle in my body burned, not from the physical strain of running, but from the raw, desperate fear that was a knot tightening in my chest cavity. I wasn't running from a broken heart. I was running from a lifetime of being owned. At 26, I was Gabriella Foster, a structural architect whose practical education had done nothing to prepare me for the grim reality of being a bargaining chip. I was an orphan, raised by a rotation of indifferent state guardians, and finally left to the mercy of a distant, indebted relative who saw fit to auction me off to the highest bidder, which happened to be Declan O'Sullivan, a man whose ambition was only outmatched by his cruelty. There was no family to mourn my disappearance, or to use as collateral. A small, cold comfort that meant I alone bore the consequences of this desperate flight. The mansion lights, visible between the gaps in the tall, manicured hedges, were searchlights in the gloom, and I could hear the muffled, angry shouts of the security detail. They were closing in. I veered sharply, my momentum carrying me around the corner of the maintenance shed. And that was when I saw it. It was not a supplier's van or a florist's truck. It was a car. A massive obsidian black stretch limousine, idling with an almost predatory patience near the service gate, waiting like a silent, well-fed beast. The polished metal reflected the frantic slashes of lightning, gleaming dangerously. Hesitation was a luxury I could not afford. I needed a hole to disappear into, and this black void was the only one offered. My hand found the handle of the passenger door. It clicked open without protest, a quiet, inviting sound that seemed entirely too easy. I threw myself across the plush leather seats and onto the floor well, pulling the heavy door shut. The soft, authoritative thud was the sound of a temporary reprieve, cutting the roar of the downpour down to a gentle, insistent drumming overhead. I curled into the shadows, the white satin of my dress now merging with the blackness, utterly ruined. The air inside the car was thick with the scent of high-grade leather, aged wood, and a sharp, clean, expensive cologne that somehow cut through the dampness clinging to my skin. I focused on the scent, on the texture of the thick carpet against my bruised knees, trying to anchor myself in the present moment, rather than dissolving into the sheer terror of what awaited me if I was found. A minute passed. Maybe 2. Then, the realization hit me. The engine had engaged. We were moving. Relief, sharp and intoxicating, flooded my system. Someone was driving this beast. Someone was taking me away from the O'Sullivan property. I began to mentally plot my next move, planning to wait for the first stoplight or traffic jam, open the door and run again. But then, the distinct measured sound of metal on glass echoed through the silent space. I froze, breath suspended in my throat. The tinted glass partition, the one separating the passenger compartment from the driver, slowly, smoothly lowered. My heart didn't just pound. It stopped, a dead weight in my chest. I had been so focused on the empty front seat and the anonymity of the car, I hadn't considered the possibility of a passenger already being there. The sudden influx of light from the street lamps we were passing, combined with the faint glow from the car's interior controls, illuminated the figure seated on the forward-facing seat. He was massive, not bulky, but powerfully built. His tailored suit, dark charcoal, the fabric so smooth it barely creased, spoke volumes of wealth and lethal precision. He held a crystal glass in one hand, swirling the amber contents slowly, deliberately. The sight was unnervingly calm, a tableau of absolute control amidst my chaos. My eyes scanned his face, the strong jawline, the sculpted cheekbones. He was devastatingly attractive, the kind of beauty that felt dangerous, like staring directly at a lightning strike. His skin was pale and smooth, exactly as the constraints specified, and there were no scars to soften the sharp angles of his profile. His hair was meticulously styled, dark as a raven's wing. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes met mine. They were dark brown, deep-set, and utterly devoid of emotion, like pools of ancient silent water that had seen too much. He was Franco Rinaldi. I knew him from the whispered rumors among the architectural community. The man whose legitimate business fronts were as notorious as his shadowed criminal empire. The undisputed capo of the Rinaldi organization, and a sworn enemy of the O'Sullivan family. He didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. His gaze drifted down to the stained fabric of my wedding dress currently pooling on his expensive floor mat. "You stained my carpet," he stated, his voice a low, resonant baritone that carried the weight of authority. It wasn't a question or a threat. It was a simple, damning observation of an undeniable truth. Terror, cold and rational, replaced blind panic. I was no longer a runaway. I was trespasser in a moving, armored cage owned by a man far more dangerous than the one I had just fled. I pushed myself up slowly, bracing one hand against the leather seat, forcing myself to meet his unwavering gaze. Years of architectural school, of presentations to hostile city councils kicked in. I had to use logic, not hysterics. "I won't beg," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rapid, frantic pulsing in my throat. "And I won't waste your time asking why you care. You don't. But I know things you need to know. Things that can be used against Declan O'Sullivan." He raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow, a minimal expression that conveyed maximum skepticism. "Everyone knows things about O'Sullivan, Miss Foster. What makes yours worth the inconvenience of cleaning my carpet?" I took a breath, recalling the months I had spent studying Declan's movements, memorizing floor plans, and listening to guarded conversations while pretending to plan centerpieces. "Your people have been trying to locate the location of the O'Sullivan family's secondary vault for months. They've been searching the old warehouse district down by the river." Franco's eyes narrowed fractionally, the first sign of genuine interest. He set his glass down on a nearby console. "Continue." "You're looking in the wrong place," I stated with professional certainty. "Declan's pride is his architecture. He hates the obvious. The vault is not in a warehouse. It's hidden behind the facade of his primary corporate building, the one he claims is only leased. It's built into a structural anomaly, a counterweighted section of the floor plan that requires an intimate knowledge of the original blueprints to find. It was designed to look like a redundant ventilation shaft in the structural schematics, a flaw I spotted weeks ago. I felt the blood drain from my face, knowing I had just sold my one and only asset. "I know exactly where it is," I finished. "If you turn me over to Declan, you lose the only person who can walk you through the structural failure point and retrieve whatever is inside. If you keep me, you gain access to millions, and you keep me alive." The car continued to move, the headlights slicing through the rain-streaked darkness of the highway. Franco leaned back against the deep leather, his hand resting on his thigh, the sheer power radiating from him almost suffocating. He studied me, my mud-splattered dress, my desperate eyes, my calculated offer. He wasn't looking at a woman. He was assessing a highly specific piece of leverage. "An architect," Franco murmured, his voice laced with the faintest hint of something that might have been amusement. "You have courage, Miss Foster. Or perhaps only desperation." He didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the low hum of the engine pulling us further and further away from the life I was supposed to have and towards the life that had just found me. The question was not if he would kill me, but when, and whether I could prove my usefulness before that time came. He finally looked at the partition button. "Driver," he commanded, his eyes still locked on mine, challenging me to brake. "Change course. We're going home. And call security. I need the blueprint archives delivered immediately." Franco Rinaldi lifted his hand and snapped his fingers, the sound sharp and conclusive in the quiet cabin. "Let's see if your blueprints match mine, Miss Foster. You've earned yourself an hour of my time." I didn't relax. I only braced myself, knowing the moment the car stopped, the real test would begin. I had traded a sure death for an uncertain execution, but at least I had the chance to argue my own case. I had grabbed the hand of the only dangerous man who could save me from the first, and now I had to prove I was worth the danger he represented. The limousine moved. Fast, efficient, the powerful engine a muffled force beneath the floorboards. The car's motion was steady, isolating me completely from the chaotic city outside the bulletproof windows. Franco Rinaldi watched me, his dark eyes assessing, calculating. He offered no comforting words, no explanations. He simply existed, a dominant presence in the confined space, demanding control. I had used my one asset, the hidden vault location, and now the time for silence was over. The journey lasted nearly 40 minutes, taking us out of the industrial districts and into the exclusive Upper Manhattan area. We bypassed security gates and private roads until the vehicle finally halted in the subterranean garage of an imposing residential tower. The granite walls here were thick, the air cool and heavily filtered. The silence that followed the engine's stop was absolute. Franco opened his door. The simple action felt like the release of a massive spring. He didn't offer a hand, nor did he look back. "Up," he ordered, his voice echoing slightly against the concrete. I scrambled out, the ruined wedding gown a heavy, impractical weight around my legs. A phalanx of men in tailored suits, not bodyguards, but soldiers, materialized from the shadows of the garage. Their eyes were cold, professional, and they regarded me with the same disinterest they might afford a piece of luggage. I was Franco Rinaldi's possession now, however temporary. We rode a private elevator straight to the penthouse. The ascent was fast, silent, dizzying. When the doors whispered open, I stepped onto polished marble floors that reflected the city lights spread out below. The apartment was vast, a study in modern minimalism and extreme luxury. Steel, glass, and dark wood dominated the architecture. This was not a home. It was a fortress suspended high above the world. He led me directly to a massive office that commanded a 270-degree view of the skyline. On the desk, illuminated by task lamps, lay the very items he had summoned. Stacks of rolled blueprints, detailed schematics, and digital tablets displaying complex CAD models. This confirmed my immediate value to him. He was a professional, and he saw me as one too, albeit a captive one. "Sit," he instructed, indicating a leather chair. He took the chair behind the desk, positioning himself between me and the floor-to-ceiling windows. "You mentioned a structural flaw in O'Sullivan's corporate building," Franco began, dispensing with pleasantries. "My teams have found no public evidence of a redundant ventilation shaft or a counterweighted floor." "You're lying, Miss Foster." "I am not," I countered immediately, the adrenaline sharpening my focus. "The flaw is not in the public records. Declan's architect was working off proprietary software owned by a firm that dissolved last year. The redundancy is a hidden feature, a space designed to balance the load-bearing requirements of the western wall. That space, accessible only through a utility conduit labeled sewage overflow on the municipal plans, is large enough for a secure vault. I saw the secondary sketches, not the final permit submissions. I pushed a tablet displaying the building's digital model towards him. "Give me 10 minutes and access to the full schematics your team retrieved, and I will pinpoint the exact coordinates." I didn't memorize it for a wedding present. Franco simply nodded to one of his men. "Give her the access codes. Now." While the man entered the security parameters into the tablet, I felt a fresh wave of professional urgency. I grabbed a stylus, ignoring the sticky mud on my hands. My mind snapped into work mode, analyzing the complex lines and load calculations. The relief of engaging my brain, of being judged by my competence rather than my body, was immense. This was the only currency I possessed. "Here," I announced, less than 6 minutes later. I circled a small, seemingly insignificant void in the western elevation schematics. The original plans show a 7-degree offset in the shear wall here. The final build has only 6 degrees. The missing degree is compensated by an interior, reinforced compartment accessible via the utility tunnel on the sublevel. Franco leaned forward, his dark eyes scrutinizing the marked section. He spoke into a sleek, dark phone. "Marco, confirm the deviation on the O'Sullivan corporate shell. Pay special attention to the sublevel utility tunnel entry point." He hung up, the silence returning. He did not compliment me. He did not praise my intelligence. He simply accepted the data as proof of concept. "Your information is highly specialized, Miss Foster. It is also dangerous," Franco said, leaning back. "Let's discuss our arrangement. Your initial proposal was leverage. Now that you have proved your competence, I am offering an employment contract." I looked out at the city, its millions of lights a glittering, deceptive carpet far below. What are the terms? I protect you absolutely from Declan O'Sullivan and his entire circle. You will reside here. You will be assigned full-time security detail. You will be provided with any resource you require. In exchange, you will be my personal structural engineer and architect for the Versiani Palace project. The Versiani Palace. I knew the project. A massive new casino and hotel complex on the Jersey coast, touted as a legitimate business venture. A venture I knew was the cornerstone of the Rinaldi family's efforts to legitimize their immense wealth. A venture that, if exposed, could bring down half the East Coast's criminal infrastructure. The Versiani Palace is massive, I observed, keeping my voice level. It is also structurally audacious. The blueprints, even the ones publicly filed, contain flaws that make the entire upper structure vulnerable to seismic instability. If that project fails, it won't just be construction delays. It will be a catastrophe. Why do you need me? Franco gave a subtle movement of his head, a gesture that acknowledged the truth in my analysis. You are correct. The original architect was competent, but predictable. I need a mind that thinks outside the standard safety parameters. Someone who sees not just how a building stands, but how it might be made to fall. I need a fortress disguised as a resort. You understand structures. You understand failure points. You, Miss Foster, are exactly what I have been looking for. The protection I offer is genuine, but the work is essential. He paused, letting the magnitude of the proposition settle. You will be paid a salary commensurate with a top-tier architect in the United States, deposited weekly. You will have a safe, a secure life, and the protection of the Rinaldi name. In return, you work for me, and only for me. You do not leave this property without permission. This is my offer. Take it or leave it. My mind raced. To leave was to walk back into the arms of Declan O'Sullivan, which meant a certain, slow, humiliating death. To stay meant exchanging one form of servitude for another, but this servitude came with protection, resources, and the chance to practice my actual profession. It was a golden cage, yes, but one where I could use my brain. The O'Sullivan family, I specified, looking at the city below. Declan specifically will not stop searching for me. Their resources are substantial, even compared to yours. I am aware of Declan's limitations, Franco stated, his voice a low rumble. Once you are under my protection, any attempt to touch you will be considered an act of war. An act of war against the Rinaldi family is fatal. I will ensure that fact is communicated clearly to him. You will be safe, Gabriella. The use of my first name was the first sign of personal engagement, a subtle shift in the dynamics of the room. It was a claim, a confirmation of the contract. I met his dark eyes, finding no malice, only intense focus. I was making a deal with a devil, but this devil was offering the security I desperately needed and a career I deserved. I accept your terms, Mr. Rinaldi, I stated, the exhaustion finally catching up to my voice. But you must understand, I am an architect. I solve problems. I will not be merely decorative. My loyalty will be to the safety of your structures, and by extension, to your organization's longevity. Not blind obedience. A flicker of something, approval perhaps, crossed Franco's face before it vanished. Competence is the only loyalty I require, Gabriella. Welcome to the Rinaldi organization. He picked up the phone again. Marco, arrange for medical evaluation, new identification documents, and a complete wardrobe. Size 4. And get the architect a fresh set of Versiani Palace blueprints. She starts work immediately. I stood, steadying myself. The exchange was complete. I had traded the tyranny of my ex-fiancé for the controlled, dangerous order of a capo. I had a safe place to sleep, a job, and a ruthless man's protection. The fear was still present, but it was overlaid with a strange, fierce relief. I was finally secure, even if that security was built on a foundation of crime and danger. My new life had begun. Weeks bled into a relentless, high-pressure routine. My life, once dictated by the anxiety of bills and the fear of Declan O'Sullivan, was now governed by the stringent, calculated order of Franco Rinaldi's world. I was living inside the penthouse, confined, yet safer than I had ever been. The security around the property was staggering. It wasn't just a home. It was a vertical fortress. My days were spent immersed in the blueprints for the Versiani Palace project, a complex, sprawling resort that was less a hotel and more a statement of permanent power. My new uniform was not silk or satin, but tailored professional work attire, neutral colors, practical fabrics, and always impeccably clean. Franco had been true to his word. I had access to every resource I required. The constant flow of documents, digital models, and secure communication lines kept me busy, preventing the introspection that often leads to panic. My value was professional, and I clung to that. The dynamic between Franco and me had solidified into a strange form of codependency, built on mutual respect for competence rather than emotional vulnerability. He was rarely present during the day, managing his legitimate and illegitimate interests from various locations, but his presence in the office, marked by the lingering scent of his expensive cologne and the perfectly neat stacks of documents, was always felt. When Franco was present, usually after midnight, the silence of the office became charged. We would often work side by side, me hunched over the massive drafting table, him reviewing contracts at his desk. I wasn't required to speak unless spoken to, but I often found myself initiating conversations about structural stress, load calculations, or material science. He listened, not with impatience, but with genuine engagement, treating my technical input as crucial, never dismissive. One evening, 3 weeks into my tenure, I was analyzing the complex web of ventilation and utility tunnels planned for the resort's subterranean parking levels. The complexity was excessive, even for a building of that size. I was reviewing the digital schematics of the penthouse itself, double-checking the integration of a new seismic dampening system Franco had ordered. I didn't just accept the files. I cross-referenced them with the building's original utility plans, a habit born from years of dealing with sloppy city engineers. That was when I noticed the anomaly. It wasn't a major structural issue, but a subtle discrepancy in the vertical shaft layout. In the old plans, the main HVAC vertical utility shaft ran cleanly from the sublevels to the roof access. In the revised, heavily encrypted blueprints Franco had given me, there was a minute 2-degree jog in the path of the shaft between the 50th and 51st floors, exactly where the penthouse was located. I spent an hour tracing the minor deviation, initially dismissing it as an error in the digital rendering. But the physical dimensions listed for the shaft changed slightly, creating a space of about 2 cubic meters that was not accounted for in any inventory or accessible floor plan. My mind, trained in structural vulnerabilities, immediately processed the implications. A space that exists outside the official grid is a perfect place to hide something. Or, more dangerously, to place something to listen. I pushed away from the drafting table, the sound of the chair scraping against the floor, loud enough to make the security guard posted outside the office door shift position. Franco was on a conference call at his desk, speaking in rapid, low Italian, his concentration absolute. I knew I couldn't speak. The anomaly might be a dead zone, a simple error, or it could be an active listening device planted by the very enemy he was protecting me from. If the latter, it meant the traitor Franco was hunting was closer than anyone suspected. I grabbed a simple, heavy yellow sticky note from his desk dispenser. I used a thick black marker and wrote only 3 sharp words. We are being listened. I walked slowly across the vast expanse of the office floor, ensuring my gait appeared casual, as if I were only stretching my legs. The movement drew Franco's attention. His eyes followed me, a silent question passing between us. I stood by his desk, waiting for him to finish the call, my hands resting lightly on the edge of the polished mahogany. He finally hung up the phone. His expression was tight, focused on whatever complex logistical problem the call had presented. Is there an issue with the Versiani roof trusses? He asked, his voice low and firm. I didn't answer with words. I waited until he looked up at me. Then I placed the yellow note directly in the center of his blotter, ensuring only he could read the bold, stark handwriting. Franco's composure was legendary. He read the note. His entire body remained still, yet the air pressure in the room seemed to drop. His dark eyes flickered, not in panic, but in fierce, cold comprehension. He didn't acknowledge the note with a verbal command. He simply slid it under a thick folder. He stood, uncoiling his large frame with fluid, predatory grace. He didn't move toward the door or reach for a weapon. He moved toward me. "That's a very striking color on you, Gabriella," he said, his voice instantly shifting its tone to one of casual, intimate courtship. It was a complete facade, a performance designed for any eavesdropper. "You should wear it more often. Come here." He reached out, not to touch my hand, but to pull me against his chest with the force and inevitability of a structural collapse. My back hit the firmness of his suit jacket. His arm locked around my waist, holding me pressed against the formidable, unyielding strength of his body. The scent of his cologne, sharp and specific, filled my senses. "Where?" Franco murmured, his lips brushing the delicate skin just behind my ear. The low vibration of his voice was a physical sensation, an intimate invasion of my space that was entirely calculated. I resisted the urge to flinch. I had to play the part. I forced my breathing to remain even, focusing on the details of his expensive jacket, the scent of fresh linen mixed with the metallic tang of danger. I used the absolute minimum movement required to speak, the 2-degree offset. I whispered, so quietly the words were barely audible even to him. "Utility shaft. Penthouse level. It's a box, not ventilation." Franco's grip tightened almost painfully on my waist, a silent acknowledgement of the severity of the situation. He rested his chin on the top of my head, creating the illusion of a moment of tender, possessive connection. "Do you know the source?" he whispered back, his breath warm against my hair. "Too small for external planting." "It's an internal access point," I replied, my voice a barely there exhale. "Someone brought it in and installed it from the inside." The truth was a sudden, freezing chill. The traitor was already inside his operation, and they had been listening to everything. My initial deal, my professional evaluations, and every detail of our quiet moments working side by side. Franco pulled me tighter, the movement emphasizing the romantic, possessive nature of the gesture for anyone listening. But for me, it was a physical shield, a sign that he was taking my warning seriously. He held me there for a long minute, a minute that felt like a lifetime suspended between danger and false intimacy. Finally, he released me, stepping back slowly, his hand lingering on the curve of my shoulder before dropping away. The transition was seamless, the practiced art of a man who lived a life of constant performance. "You look tired, cara mia," he said, his voice louder now, returning to a tone of mild command. "Go get some rest. I want you fresh for the meeting tomorrow morning. Your analysis will be critical." The endearment, "my dear" in Italian, landed more like a claim than comfort. He dismissed me with a look of possessive affection that felt alien but necessary. I understood the unspoken command. The conversation was over. The game was on. I walked to my designated suite, the knowledge of the surveillance a heavy, chilling cloak around my shoulders. Franco Rinaldi, the ruthless capo, was now dependent on me, the runaway architect, to expose the weakness in his own walls. I was not afraid of him, but I was terrified of what he would do to the person who had betrayed him, and what that subsequent chaos would mean for my fragile security. Before closing the heavy oak door, I glanced back down the hallway. I saw 2 men, Marco and another security operative, silently entering the office. They moved with the silent, deadly focus of executioners. Franco was already standing by the utility shaft area I had indicated, his profile sharp against the window lights, holding the yellow note in one hand. The silence was unnerving. I sat on the edge of the large, soft bed, the first place I had ever felt truly safe, and realized that safety was an illusion. It was a temporary calculation, and it could be retracted at any moment. But I had played my hand. I had used my intellect to buy my life, and now I had to use it to secure my future. I closed my eyes. The image of Franco's cold, calculating focus burned behind my eyelids. The threat was real, but so was the protection I was now intrinsically tied to. The discovery of the surveillance device in Franco's penthouse utility shaft had escalated the tension, transforming our quiet working arrangement into an active tactical alliance. After the incident, the the penthouse felt colder, the silence more scrutinizing. Franco's security detail had swept the entire floor, and the results, whispered in low Italian and exchanged through encrypted tablets, confirmed my analysis. The listening device was advanced, placed internally, and had been active for weeks. My competence had not just earned me protection, it had made me indispensable. A week after the discovery, Franco decided it was time to move the operation. Not out of the city, but into the eye of the storm, the Versiani Palace construction site, on the Jersey coast. This move served two purposes. It removed us from the compromised penthouse, and it allowed me to perform a crucial first-hand assessment of the structural issues I had spotted on the blueprints, issues that indicated a deeper sabotage than just misplaced trusses. We traveled in a convoy of armored SUVs. I sat in the lead vehicle with Franco, enveloped by his powerful, silent presence. I wore practical dark pants and a thick, high-visibility construction jacket. My hands were already tracing diagrams in a secure notebook, running stability calculations in my mind. The site itself was massive, a testament to ambition and vast, almost obscene wealth. Cranes clawed at the sky, concrete trucks churned constantly, and hundreds of workers moved with coordinated chaos. It was a buzzing, dangerous environment. Franco's team had already established a temporary command center in a reinforced trailer near the core structure. "We begin at the support core," Franco instructed, his voice amplified by the construction noise. "The public plans show a standard shear wall arrangement. Your schematics show the core is offset by 0.4 degrees. I want to know why, and if it's intentional sabotage." We donned hard hats. Mine was white, marking me as engineering staff. Franco's was black, marking him as the unquestioned authority. The air was thick with the scent of wet concrete, cut steel, and damp salt from the nearby ocean. We started at the sub-levels, walking through the skeletal framework of what would eventually be ballrooms and casinos. I ran my hands over the raw concrete, feeling for vibrations, checking the alignment of the massive steel columns. My mind was analyzing stress loads, material quality, and foundational integrity. The workers, most of whom had probably never seen their boss on site, moved out of Franco's way instantly. They glanced at me with confusion, a slender woman in a white hat walking stride for stride with the capo. As we ascended to the middle section of the tower, focusing on the main load-bearing transfer deck, I became increasingly uncomfortable. The structural integrity calculations for this specific area were running badly in my head. My technical intuition was screaming. "The wind load compensation struts on the south flank," I said, stopping abruptly near a temporary hoist platform. "They are undersized. Based on the geological survey and the projected height, the specified tensile strength is insufficient. A Category 3 hurricane could shear them clean off." "The original architect signed off," Franco stated, his voice low, his dark eyes sweeping the section, not for flaws, but for signs of human oversight. "The original architect was either corrupt or incompetent," I countered, pulling out a measuring device and quickly taking a reading. "These specifications are exactly what Declan O'Sullivan would use to create plausible deniability while leaving a catastrophic weak point. It's an engineered failure, Franco, not an accident." He trusted my technical read instantly. He didn't ask why me or question my judgment. He simply activated the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Marco, halt all work on transfer deck 12. Secure the south shear wall supports immediately. No one moves until Gabriella gives the all clear." We spent the next 2 hours in that volatile, unfinished section of the tower. I directed his construction foreman, pointing out the flawed bolts, the compromised welds, the deliberate mistakes that would have caused the central deck to pancake during the resort's first major coastal storm. The workers obeyed me, not because I was Franco's woman, but because I spoke the cold, hard language of physics and engineering. We had just confirmed the last major flaw on that deck, turning to leave the temporary hoist platform, when it happened. A sharp, metallic crack echoed from above, impossibly loud in the echoing cavity of the building core. It was the sound of stressed steel failing instantly. My training overrode my fear. My eyes shot up, assessing the angle of the sound. "The overhead lift!" I shouted, the noise barely covering the immediate terror in my voice. A massive, unsecured section of steel I-beam, intended for the facade, had snapped from its high-altitude tether. It was plummeting toward the very spot where we were standing on the hoist platform. There was no time for elaborate thought, no room for analysis. Instinct, pure and raw, took over. I saw the trajectory, I saw the angle, and I saw the 3 seconds we had left. The structural danger was undeniable. I shoved Franco with every ounce of strength I possessed, hurling him sideways off the hoist platform and against the concrete wall. The movement was explosive and driven by adrenaline. His massive, powerful body hit the rough concrete with a dull thud. Before he could react or even utter a sound, the enormous steel beam sliced down, impacting the hoist platform with a screaming metallic crunch that reverberated through the entire tower. The platform buckled and broke, sending debris, tools, and metal shards spraying outward. We were covered instantly in a cloud of thick, choking concrete dust and dirt. The noise was deafening, the air thick and unbreathable. My body was slammed against the wall beside him by the concussive force of the impact. I collapsed onto the gritty, damp floor, coughing violently, the taste of dust and copper heavy in my mouth. My head swam, but the immediate, primal relief that the massive beam had missed us kept my consciousness tethered. A second of silence followed, broken only by my ragged breathing and the panicked shouts of workers scrambling high above. Then, Franco moved. He didn't check the debris or look for his men. He moved immediately to me, his arms clamped around my waist, his hands moving with brutal efficiency, checking my limbs, my head, my spine. He was covered in dust, his expensive suit now ruined with concrete powder and dirt, but his focus was absolute. "Gabriella, talk to me. Are you injured?" he commanded, his voice raw, close to my ear. His usual composure was shattered, replaced by an urgent, dangerous fury. I struggled to suck air into my lungs. "I'm fine. Just dust. That wasn't an accident, Franco. The tether was scored, intentional." He ignored my analysis. His fingers lifted my chin, forcing my eyes to meet his. His dark brown eyes, usually pools of icy control, were blazing with a powerful, terrifying intensity I had never witnessed before. The raw emotion in that gaze was a shock, a profound violation of the cool, transactional nature of our relationship. "You saved my life," he stated, the words clipped and flat. Not a question, but a realization that clearly shook the fundamental core of his being. He had never allowed anyone to get close enough to risk themselves for him. And I, the hostage architect, had just thrown myself in the path of a collapsing steel beam for him. The technical risk assessment was irrelevant now. He didn't give me time to process the weight of that statement. His hand, strong and covered in concrete grit, cupped the back of my neck. He pulled me forward, closing the minuscule distance between us. The kiss was sudden, explosive, and absolute. It was nothing like the tender moments described in romance novels. It was primal, born from adrenaline, trauma, and the metallic scent of near death. His mouth was hard, demanding, tasting of dust and raw power. He didn't ask permission. He claimed it, pushing the raw electric energy of the moment into me. I responded instantly, an equally primal need answering his demand. My hands grabbed the front of his dust-coated suit jacket, clinging to the only anchor in the sudden, shocking chaos of the ruined construction deck. The kiss was not sweet. It was a desperate, fierce confirmation of life, of survival, of a bond forged in the crucible of absolute danger. He finally pulled back, resting his forehead against mine, his breath ragged against my lips. We were both coated in dust, shaking from the adrenaline and the violence of the moment. "You are mine, Gabriella," he growled, the possessiveness fierce and undeniable, a deep, rumbling claim that resonated through my bones. "You saved me. I will burn this city down before I let anything else touch you." The transactional nature of our agreement, protection for architecture, was gone. In the space of 3 terrifying seconds, it had been replaced by a fierce, undeniable bond forged in concrete dust and shared peril. Franco Rinaldi, the man who trusted no one, was staring at the woman who had just risked everything for him. His eyes were dark, filled with a dangerous, protective heat that terrified and thrilled me simultaneously. He pushed me gently behind his massive frame, instantly reverting to the role of protector. "Marco," he yelled into the radio. "Seal the entire floor. Check every tether and cable. Find the crew responsible for the lift, and get a medic here. Now." He turned back to me, the fury in his eyes now cold and directed outward. "We're done here. They have seen you, and they have seen that you are essential. You are coming with me. We have a traitor to find, and a debt to settle." I looked around the destruction. The massive steel beam, the shattered platform, the cloud of lingering dust. The evidence was clear. Someone had planned to kill Franco Rinaldi on this deck, and now, thanks to my structural eye, not only had I exposed the flaws in his building, but I had exposed the flaws in his organization. I had bought my life with my brain, and now I had paid for it with my body. The bond was sealed. I was ready to face the storm that was coming. The adrenaline from the construction site collapse, and the subsequent explosive kiss, had not faded. It had been neatly channeled, transformed by Franco Rinaldi into cold, strategic focus. After the attack, we didn't return to the compromised penthouse. We retreated to a secure, remote bunker known only as the Cellar, a luxurious subterranean vault designed for long-term survival, where I continued my structural analysis under layers of security. The Versiani Palace attack proved two things. Declan O'Sullivan was leveraging internal Rinaldi operatives, and his objective was Franco's death, not merely my retrieval. "They want to dismantle me physically and financially," Franco stated 2 days later, standing over a holographic display of the city's power grid. "And they intend to make a statement. We need to draw them out. We need to make them think they have pushed me into a fatal mistake." The new plan was simple, audacious, and terrifying. Use me as bait. At a major public event. Simple didn't mean careless. By the time Franco finished outlining the operation, Marco had teams assigned to every exit, overwatch on surrounding rooftops, and enough plainclothes security embedded in the crowd to ensure I was the most protected piece on the board even while I played bait. "Tonight is the Russo Bellini charity auction," Franco informed me, his eyes dark with calculation. "The entire spectrum of power will be there. Legitimate commerce, politicians, and every single rival organization, including the O'Sullivan delegation. You will be my partner. My chosen, willing, and very public Contessa." The word meant countess, but in his mouth it sounded less like a title and more like a role he was asking me to inhabit. The preparation was meticulous. His personal stylist, a sharp Italian man named Silvio, arrived with a curated selection of gowns. I explicitly avoided the navy blues, choosing instead a gown of deep emerald green. The color was electric, sharp, and felt dangerous, complementing the fierce intensity that had begun to define my existence under Franco's roof. The dress was a sheath of silk and lace, cut high on the thigh, emphasizing strength rather than fragility. It was a disguise of power. Franco surveyed me before we left the cellar. He was in an impeccable black tuxedo, his physique radiating controlled aggression. His dark eyes swept over the gown, the professional updo, the lack of ostentatious jewelry. "Good choice," he approved, his voice low. "It suits your eyes. You will hold my arm. You will not flinch. You will look at me with the absolute devotion of a woman who knows her future is secured by the man beside her. You are not a prisoner, Gabriella. You are my most valuable asset, publicly displayed. You are untouchable." He moved closer, lifting my chin with a large, warm hand. "We are walking into a den of wolves. They want to see fear. Show them steel. Let Declan see that the little architect he abandoned has chosen the biggest monster in the room." I nodded, the fear present but muffled by the professional need to execute the plan. "My loyalty is to the structure, Franco. I will execute the mission." "Exactly," he murmured, before pressing a quick, proprietary kiss to my temple. "Tonight, the mission is psychological warfare." The drive from the cellar to the venue, a palatial, historic hall in Midtown, was tense. The convoy of 3 black armored vehicles moved like a silent fist through the evening traffic. When we arrived, the entrance was a blinding cascade of flash photography. The air was buzzing with the electric energy of high society mingling with high danger. As we walked the red carpet, Franco's hand settled heavily and possessively on the small of my back, a constant, firm anchor. The simple gesture spoke volumes. It claimed me. I forced my expression into one of serene, cool confidence, ignoring the whispers and the cameras flashing like rapid-fire artillery. I leaned into his strength, playing the role of the devoted, secure partner. The ballroom was a glittering, chaotic masterpiece of crystal and money. Power brokers, rival capos, senators, and movie producers filled the space. Franco introduced me sparingly, always with the same non-negotiable tone. "This is Gabriella Foster, my partner." Not mistress, not employee, but partner. My job was to observe. I scanned the room for two things: any Rinaldi associates who seemed overly anxious or distant, the internal traitor, and, most importantly, the delegation from the O'Sullivan family. We hadn't been circulating for more than 20 minutes, just long enough to cement my presence, when the atmosphere shifted. The crowd seemed to part slightly near the main entrance, creating a momentary dramatic gap in the flow. Declan O'Sullivan stood there. He hadn't changed. Same tailored suit, same smirk that always promised cruelty, same self-satisfied arrogance. But tonight, his eyes, usually cold, were burning with a frustrated rage that was barely contained. The sight of me, alive, in a dress that screamed money and influence, attached to the arm of his rival, was clearly an intolerable personal insult. He started walking toward us, his pace measured, a false calm masking the explosive fury underneath. Franco's grip on my back tightened to a warning squeeze, urging me to remain anchored. "Franco," Declan greeted, his voice dripping with faux congeniality, stopping just a yard away. He completely ignored Franco's presence for a moment, focusing his gaze solely on me, attempting to penetrate the facade. "Look at you, Gabriella. You clean up well. I suppose Rinaldi is paying your debt now, is he? It's touching that he would buy a runaway bride and parade her like a new trophy." His words were meant to humiliate me, to strip away my composure and expose the terrified girl hiding in the limo. The old Gabriella would have flinched, stammered, or cried, but the girl who had saved Franco from a steel beam on a dusty construction site was gone. I met his gaze, my eyes level and cold. My mind filtered his attack, realizing it was an attempt to destabilize Franco by casting doubt on my loyalty. I spoke before Franco could intervene. My voice was low, steady, carrying the weight of the emerald green dress and the absolute protection I now commanded. "Declan," I said, using his first name with dismissive familiarity. "It's quite simple, really. I was offered a merger with a partner who values structural integrity and professional competence. You offered me a contract built on instability and debt. I chose the better deal." I paused, letting my gaze drift pointedly toward Franco, then back to Declan. "I am not a trophy. I am a partner. And frankly, Declan, your taste in architecture was always as weak as your ambition." The insult, delivered with the cold precision of a professional critique, was far more damaging than any emotional outburst. It implied I had chosen Franco, not out of desperation, but out of rational assessment of their respective empires. A muscle ticked in Declan's jaw. His composure cracked, the rage finally bubbling to the surface. "You are running from something you cannot escape, little girl. You will be back. One way or another, you will kneel." That was the line. The direct threat. Franco moved. He didn't raise his voice or his hand. He simply stepped closer, pressing his formidable body against mine, his size eclipsing Declan completely. He rested his chin on the top of my head, an intimate gesture that simultaneously blocked Declan's view and claimed possession. "She already kneels for me, Declan," Franco murmured, his voice a low, lethal whisper that was meant only for O'Sullivan's ears. "And she did it willingly, on the night she exposed your incompetence. The moment she set foot in my car, she became an extension of my life, my wealth, and my protection. If you ever address her directly again, if your people so much as look at her sideways, I will consider it a declaration of war, a direct attack on the Rinaldi Foundation. And you know, better than anyone, what I do to the foundations of my rivals." The threat was delivered with such chilling certainty that Declan's fury curdled into something far more dangerous. Fear. He saw the genuine, protective heat in Franco's eyes. He saw the unwavering confidence in mine. He had lost. Declan forced a weak smile, a mask of professionalism sliding back into place, though his hand was visibly trembling at his side. "Enjoy the evening, Franco. Don't worry about my incompetence. I'm sure your structural expert will keep everything sound." He nodded curtly and retreated, dissolving back into the crowd, his mission to destabilize us having spectacularly failed. Franco remained pressed against me for a few more seconds, ensuring the crowd understood the exchange was conclusive. "Well done." He breathed against my hair, the tension leaving his muscles slowly. "Perfect execution. Now, we leave. They know the bait has worked." The exit was immediate. We did not wait for the car to be brought to the front. We were ushered through a side service exit, surrounded by Marco and 4 additional silent bodyguards. The urgency was palpable. Declan would not tolerate the public humiliation. Retaliation would be swift. We were barely 20 seconds into the journey, moving through the cramped, rain-slicked side streets of Midtown, when the first sign of danger appeared. A dark SUV, headlights off, swerved violently out of an alleyway, aiming directly at the side of our armored lead vehicle. "Incoming!" the driver shouted over the secure radio line. The sound of metal crunching against the armored side panel was deafening, the impact throwing me violently against Franco, who had already shielded me with his body. The car didn't stop. It accelerated, the powerful engine roaring as our driver, a highly trained operative, used the contact to spin the attacking SUV into a streetlight, disabling it instantly. "2 more vehicles in pursuit," Franco commanded, his voice sharp and steady, even as the car rattled violently. He pulled me down onto the floor, covering my head with his massive hand. The next few minutes were a blur of screeching tires, violent maneuvers, and the muffled, distinct thunk of bullets hitting the bulletproof plating of the car. It was terrifying, raw, and exhilarating all at once. I felt Franco's body pressed tightly against mine, his weight a comforting, absolute assurance of protection. He didn't speak. He simply held me, his arm a steel band across my back, his presence a shield against the mayhem outside. The difference between this terror and the terror of running from Declan was stark. Here, I was in the safest place possible, protected by the very storm I was running toward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the car straightened out, accelerating into the relative safety of a tunnel entrance. The sounds of pursuit faded, replaced by the deep, consistent hum of the powerful engine. Franco slowly lifted his head, then pulled me up to sit beside him. The emerald green dress was wrinkled, my hair slightly disheveled, but we were otherwise unharmed. He didn't comment on the near-death experience. He simply looked at my face, checking for injuries, his thumb gently wiping a smudge of makeup from my cheek. "They are desperate," he stated, his voice low and cold with renewed fury. "Their next move will be chaotic. We are going back to the cellar. The game is over. Now, we finish it." The psychological warfare was complete. Declan had been publicly crushed, and his immediate, violent retaliation had been deflected. The last piece of the puzzle, the location and timing of the final confrontation, was all that remained. I leaned my head against Franco's shoulder, utterly exhausted but alive, knowing the battle had been won. But the war was only just beginning. The silence in the cellar. Franco's subterranean bunker was more oppressive than the noise of the city. We had arrived just after the high-speed chase, the adrenaline still thrumming beneath my skin. The emerald green dress, now ripped and stained from the impact of the car chase, was discarded, and I was dressed in a soft, oversized cashmere sweater that belonged to Franco. The environment here was stark, metallic, and absolutely secure, a fortress built against the worst-case scenario. Franco had suffered a graze wound on his shoulder from a stray bullet during the final moments of the pursuit. It was a minor injury, but it had shaken my calculated composure. I was the one applying antiseptic and bandaging the wound, my hands steady with the professional focus of a structural engineer, not a nurse. The intimacy of the task, however, was inescapable. I was touching the man who controlled my life, the man who had just risked his own life to shield mine. "You should have let Marco handle this," Franco said, his voice low, his face a mask of weary control as I secured the final wrap of gauze. "Marco isn't an architect," I replied, my eyes meeting his. I am responsible for the structural integrity of your operation, and that includes the immediate repair of damage sustained in the field. Besides, your security team is busy cleaning up the disaster zone we left in Midtown. I finished the bandage and looked at him. The trauma of the near-fatal car chase and the discovery of the deep internal betrayal had finally cracked his legendary composure. The man who never showed weakness was visibly strained, his dark eyes shadowed with exhaustion and cold, dangerous fury. "Declan O'Sullivan is finished," Franco stated, ignoring his injury. He was staring at the wall, but his mind was running tactical scenarios. He tried to kill me publicly, using multiple vehicles. He has burned his bridges with every faction, but he still has something to gain. He has one last play. I knew the logic. Declan wouldn't retreat. He would go for a catastrophic final act. The target would be the Versiani Palace, the visible keystone of Franco's legitimate empire. He wants a final meeting, I deduced, moving to the secure communication station where his encrypted terminals were running analysis. A place where the power imbalance is reversed. A place where his chance of escape is 0, but his chance of doing maximum damage is highest. He's looking for leverage. Franco nodded slowly, confirming my analysis. He called an hour ago. He wants to meet tomorrow night. A neutral site. The old Fanim Portside warehouse district, near the abandoned Pier 7. My mind immediately flagged the location. The Portside warehouse district. I had studied that area extensively 3 years ago during a consulting gig for the city's redevelopment committee. My job then had been to assess the safety and environmental stability of the derelict zone. Franco stood, his movement stiff from the impact of the crash. I will go with Marco and 4 men. He will bring just enough security to look legitimate. I am going to end this war. No, I said, turning from the terminal, my voice clear and firm. Franco's eyes snapped to mine, filled with incredulous warning. This is not up for discussion, Gabriella. You are staying here. The cellar is impenetrable. Your job is to stay alive and continue your work. I will not risk you. You don't understand the structure of Pier 7, Franco, I insisted, moving toward him, not in protest, but with urgent professional logic. I worked on the assessment. That warehouse district is built on reclaimed marshland, with highly unstable foundations. But that's not the critical issue. I pulled up the old geological survey on the screen. The display showed the foundational layers of the warehouse site. Look at the sublevels, I explained, tapping the screen to highlight the area. During the 1950s, that entire section was used for chemical and gas storage. The city's initial renovation plans were scrapped because they discovered deep, unmapped tunnels of residual methane and sulfur dioxide gas trapped in the porous soil beneath the concrete slab. The concentration is high enough that any significant vibration, a grenade, a sustained automatic weapon fire, would compromise the structural foundation, causing a collapse and, more dangerously, igniting the residual gas. It will not be an ambush, Franco. It will be a suicide bombing disguised as a parley. Declan knows the location's history, I guarantee it. Franco stared at the screen, the data laid out in the precise, objective language of science and engineering. His rage cooled, replaced by the grim calculation of a man whose enemy has just introduced a variable he hadn't foreseen. He looked at me, realizing I had just saved his life a 3rd time. Not with muscle, but with superior knowledge. He wants to take the entire Rinaldi command structure with him, Franco murmured, his voice dangerously soft. He doesn't care if he survives. He cares about the final spectacle. You cannot go, Franco. Not with a crew, I insisted. Even the friction of a car braking too hard in the parking lot could set off a chain reaction if the slab is thin enough. If you go, you die. And I lose my protection, and the contract is void. Franco ran a hand over his face, a gesture of exhaustion. I must go. The omission of the meeting is a greater sign of weakness than risking a trap. He will sense the fear. He knows I have to show face. He looked at me, his eyes dark. The intense connection we shared now focused on a single shared objective: survival. I will go, but I will go alone, minimizing the risk of a full-scale firefight. Marco will be parked 2 blocks away. You, he commanded, his voice turning absolute. will stay here. The security protocols are double-layered. If anything happens to me, you will be extracted immediately to the European contacts. You are the structural memory of the Versiani Palace. You must survive." He stood, gathering his tailored coat and the concealed weapons he always carried. He moved towards the heavy vault door of the bunker. "I have to go, Gabriella. I have to finish this." He was leaving me, trading his life for the stability of his empire, trusting the security of the cellar to keep me safe. I knew arguing was pointless. His decision was rooted in the honor and pride of his capo role. I watched him go, the massive steel door sliding shut with a heavy final sound. The moment the lock engaged, I moved to the command terminal. My logical mind, the part that had spotted the 2-degree offset in the plans and the failure point on the construction deck, was now processing a single cold fact. If Franco dies, Declan O'Sullivan wins, and I am dead anyway. The cellar was impenetrable, but it was also a prison. If Franco was eliminated, the Rinaldi organization would dissolve into a power vacuum, and the surviving O'Sullivan faction would eventually find me. I worked quickly, pulling up the schematics of the cellar itself. My work on the Versiani Palace had given me a deep understanding of Franco's security systems. I found the flaw. It wasn't a structural flaw, but a subtle override, a maintenance-only access point that could be bypassed with the right sequence of codes and a specialized tool Franco kept in a locked drawer. I was an architect. I knew how things were built, and therefore, how they could be unbuilt. I found the tool, a small diamond-tipped glass cutter, and typed the override sequence into the security pad. The internal security system blinked from red to a temporary green. I had exactly 3 minutes before the main alarm engaged. I grabbed my jacket and a secure flash drive containing all the structural flaw reports I had prepared for the Versiani Palace. This was my leverage. This was my life insurance. I sprinted down the long metallic corridor towards the garage level. The risk was monumental. I was leaving the most secure place in the world to run toward a potential explosion and an active war zone. But I was not going to watch the man who had given me safety walk into a gas trap he couldn't see. I located a small, unassuming sedan. Not an armored vehicle, but a fast, simple car. I used a code from the maintenance logs to start the ignition. I wouldn't be able to catch Franco's armored convoy, but I didn't need to. I only needed to get to Pier 7 before the meeting began. I had to get there to warn him, not with words, but with a calculated structural act of pure desperation. As I sped out of the subterranean garage, my mind was racing. My survival was now completely dependent on my ability to outsmart a war game using nothing but my professional knowledge. I was running into the fire, but this time, it was a fire I understood. The small sedan I drove out of the cellar was fast, but it wasn't armored. It felt vulnerable, small, and terrifyingly exposed on the highways that led toward the old portside warehouse district. My hands gripped the wheel, not with fear, but with a desperate, professional urgency. I was not a woman in love rushing to save her man. I was an architect rushing to prevent a catastrophic structural and chemical failure that would take out half of Franco's operation and compromise the entire waterfront. The drive was a blur of calculated risks. I pushed the small car to its limit, weaving through the late-night traffic. My mind focused entirely on the geological map of Pier 7. The gas tunnels were shallow, the water table high, and the concrete slab of the abandoned warehouse, the supposed neutral ground for the meeting, was, according to my old survey data, dangerously thin. Any significant impact would crack it, allowing the accumulated methane to rush to the surface, where a single gunshot or a running engine could initiate an explosion. I knew Franco would be there first. His paranoia and punctuality ensured that. He would walk into the building, alone, trusting only in his own combat skills, completely unaware that the ground beneath his feet was a ticking chemical bomb. I finally reached the edge of the portside district. The area was exactly as I remembered. Dark, decaying, filled with empty shipping containers, and the smell of brackish water and rust. I abandoned the sedan 3 blocks away, tucking it behind a stack of crates, and proceeded on foot. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the intermittent yellow security lamps on the pier, which cast long, deceptive shadows. The warehouse at Pier 7 was a massive, desolate structure. Its windows were broken, its corrugated iron roof rusted. I could see Franco's black armored SUV parked 2 blocks away, exactly where he had ordered Marco to wait. I knew Franco had already entered the building, alone. I moved along the shadow of a large cargo container, running toward the rear of the warehouse. I needed a vantage point, a way to signal him without drawing the attention of Declan O'Sullivan's men, who were undoubtedly positioned nearby. As I rounded the corner, I spotted them. 4 men in dark tactical gear, positioned behind a crumbling concrete wall 50 yards from the main entrance. And then, I saw the 5th man, Declan O'Sullivan himself, standing near the main entrance, smoking a cigarette, waiting for his grand finale. He looked calm, savoring the moment of absolute control he thought he held. There was no time to use words. I couldn't shout, or I would be shot instantly, alerting Declan and potentially initiating the shootout that would detonate the gas. I had to create a distraction, a calculated, violent disruption that forced Franco out without giving Declan a chance to react. My eyes scanned the immediate area, searching for structural weakness or an available tool. 100 feet away, near the water's edge, I spotted a heavy forklift, old, covered in rust, but operational, its keys dangling in the ignition, left by some negligent night watchman. The plan formed instantly, a cold, desperate structural equation. I ran for the forklift. I climbed onto the seat, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I turned the key. The diesel engine coughed once, then roared to life, a sound that was deafening in the silence of the docks, immediately drawing the attention of Declan's men. I rammed the forklift into drive, accelerating toward the warehouse wall. I didn't head for the main entrance, which was too thick. I headed for a large, weathered section of the rear corrugated iron wall, an area I knew from the old city plans was structurally weakest, near a large, empty fuel tank. Declan's men were shouting now, pulling their weapons, unsure where the attack was coming from. I aimed the heavy steel tines of the forklift straight at the weak point of the wall. My structural analysis told me I needed a precise impact. Enough force to breach the wall and create maximum noise and dust, but not so much as to shake the entire foundation and prematurely ignite the gas below. I hit the wall. The impact was violent, jarring my entire body. The metal screamed, bending and tearing with a force that was deafening. The headlights of the forklift pierced the interior darkness, flooding the empty, cavernous space where Franco and Declan were meant to be meeting. I threw the machine into reverse, pulling the tines free, leaving a massive, jagged hole in the side of the building. I then jumped off the running forklift, leaving the engine running, its headlights shining through the hole like an artificial sun. The noise and sudden breach achieved 2 things. It threw Declan's men into disarray, forcing them to fire blindly at the new intrusion, and it delivered an unmistakable message to Franco. I didn't enter the building. I ducked low, scrambling behind a stack of waterlogged barrels, pulling the diamond-tipped glass cutter from my pocket and clutching it like a weapon. Shouts and gunfire erupted inside the warehouse. The structure of the trap was broken. A minute later, a figure burst through the jagged hole I had created. It was Franco. His suit was ripped at the shoulder, his face grim, but he was alive. His eyes scanned the exterior with the terrifying focus of a predator. He spotted me immediately, hiding behind the barrels. "Gabriella! What in God's name are you doing?" he bellowed, his voice filled with a mixture of shock and sheer, unadulterated fury. "Gas!" I screamed back, pointing wildly toward the foundations. "Methane! The floor is compromised. Any more shooting? It explodes! Get out!" He understood instantly. He hadn't just faced a physical enemy inside. He was standing on a bomb. He didn't ask how I knew. He trusted the structural warning without hesitation. Before Franco could move, Declan O'Sullivan, his face contorted with rage at the failure of his elaborate trap, stumbled out of the main entrance, a heavy pistol in his hand. He saw Franco. He saw the smoking forklift, and he saw me. "The bitch!" Declan snarled, aiming his weapon at me. "I told you she was the weakness, Rinaldi. Now watch her die." Franco moved with impossible speed. He tackled Declan, slamming him against the corner of the warehouse structure. The pistol clattered onto the concrete floor. The hand-to-hand fight that ensued was brutal, silent, and entirely focused. Franco was not fighting to subdue. He was fighting to execute. I was paralyzed for a second, watching the men fight. Declan's men, finally recovering from the shock of the forklift, began sprinting toward the fight, their weapons raised. I had to act, not as Franco's partner, but as a structural defense. I spotted a stack of unstable, rusting I-beams leaning against the external wall. I screamed, not to warn Franco, but to distract the arriving bodyguards. "The beams! The south support is cracked! It's going to collapse!" The bodyguards froze, their ingrained instinct against structural failure overriding their combat training. That hesitation was all Franco needed. He delivered a final concussive blow to Declan's temple. Declan sagged, unconscious. Franco grabbed Declan's collar, dragging his limp body away from the immediate area. "We're leaving!" he roared, pulling me from behind the barrels. "Now!" We ran toward the sedan I had parked, but as we reached the corner of the crate stack, a desperate final sound broke the night. One of Declan's remaining men, seeing his boss defeated, fired a final, wild, frustrated shot from the darkness. The bullet missed Franco, but it hit the ground. Not the main concrete slab, but a thin, peripheral area right near the abandoned fuel tank. The resulting spark was tiny, insignificant, yet final. A terrifying whoosh sound preceded the deep, rumbling concussion. The ground beneath the warehouse structure, destabilized by the gas tunnels, began to give way. A column of fire and sulfurous smoke erupted from the cracked slab near the center of the building. "Run!" Franco yelled, throwing Declan's body down behind the crate stack. He grabbed my hand, dragging me toward the car. We jumped into the sedan. Franco didn't bother with the keys. He hot-wired the ignition with 2 swift, practiced movements. As the engine roared to life, the entire portside warehouse, Pier 7, exploded behind us in a massive, shattering firestorm of gas and crumbling concrete. The blast wave hit the small car, rocking it violently, shattering the windshield. Franco didn't stop. He accelerated into the night, leaving the inferno and the ruins of Declan O'Sullivan's final play behind us. I looked back, seeing the flames lick against the night sky, a terrifying, irreversible image of a war finally concluded. I slumped back in the seat, covered in sweat, dirt, and glass shards. The only thing I knew was that I was alive, and Franco was alive, saved by a structural diagram and a reckless, desperate act of engineering. The line between architect and gangster had completely dissolved. The sedan, battered and smoking, finally coasted to a stop near the main Rinaldi warehouse district, far from the inferno of Pier 7. Franco's security convoy, alerted by Marco to the ambush and subsequent explosion, descended upon us instantly. The transition from the chaos of the chase to the controlled order of the organization was jarring. I was pulled from the car, checked by a medic, and quickly ushered into the secure offices. Franco was immediately immersed in damage control. The destruction of Pier 7 had eliminated Declan O'Sullivan, but it was a calculated mess, a public spectacle that required immediate, strategic response to manage the legal fallout and the inevitable vacuum of power. He was conferring in low, rapid Italian with his captains, his voice sharp and absolute, directing cleanup, liaisons with corrupt city officials, and preemptive strikes against any O'Sullivan remnants seeking to claim territory. I was left in a quiet, luxurious, and highly secure secondary office. My heart was still pounding, but the immediate adrenaline had subsided, replaced by a deep, weary exhaustion. My work was technically done. The structural integrity of Franco's life had been saved, and the source of his operational weakness eliminated. When Franco finally entered the room, the sun was beginning to rise, casting long, pale shadows across the expensive carpet. He was no longer covered in dust and sweat. He had changed into a fresh, crisp black suit, looking every bit the capo who had just survived a war. But his eyes, usually cold and calculating, held a depth of intensity that was new, focused entirely on me. He dismissed the security guards with a silent wave. They found Declan's body in the rubble. He was crushed instantly when the foundation buckled. "It's over." I nodded, absorbing the finality of the statement. The man who had forced me into servitude, who had chased me across the city, was now just a pile of rubble and ash. The debt was paid. My protection was absolute. "I should have left you in the cellar," Franco said, his voice flat, walking toward me. "You disobeyed a direct, non-negotiable order. You risked everything." I met his gaze, refusing to apologize for my pragmatic decision. "You were walking into a chemical trap, Franco. Your security protocols are designed for bullets, not methane. You would be dead. My loyalty is to the structure's survival. If you are the core support, I must ensure the core does not fail." He stopped directly in front of me. He didn't argue the logic because the logic was flawless. He reached out and cupped my cheek, his thumb gently tracing the line of my jaw. The touch was possessive, final, and deeply personal, devoid of the professional distance we usually maintained. "You risked your life for me, Gabriela," he murmured, his dark eyes searching mine. "Not for a contract, but for my survival. That is not a debt. That is something else." He didn't need to define it. The shift had occurred days ago, on the dusty construction deck when I shoved him from the path of the falling I-beam. It was solidified during the chaos of the car chase, and cemented when I drove a forklift through a warehouse wall to save him from an explosion. Our relationship had moved beyond the transactional. "The contract is nullified," Franco stated, his voice a low, absolute decree. "Your life is no longer conditional on your work. It is conditional on us." He stepped back and swept his hand toward the window overlooking the city. "The Versiani Palace is going forward. The foundation is stable thanks to you. The design is perfect. But I do not want an employee. I want a partner, a co-founder. Someone who sees the weak points and the hidden strengths of my entire life, my empire and my heart." "You are asking me to be more than an architect, Franco," I observed, realizing the full weight of his proposal. "You are asking me to be part of the structure of a criminal enterprise." "I am asking you to be the structure," he corrected, his expression intense. "The Versiani Palace is not the end. It is the beginning. It is the visible foundation of my legitimate future. But the real fortress is here." He tapped his own chest. "And here." He gestured to my head. "We will build it together, as equals." He took my hand, his grip firm and warm, a stark contrast to the cold, early morning light. "I need my wife to be the architect of my life, Gabriela. Will you take the title, the risk, and the power that comes with it?" I looked at his face, at the man who was both my protector and the most dangerous man I had ever known. He didn't offer a perfect life, but he offered an absolute one, built on mutual respect and shared competence. He didn't offer to remove the danger, but he offered to face it with me, side by side. "I accept the partnership, Franco," I confirmed, my voice steady. "But I will design the security features, and I choose the furniture." A rare, small smile touched the corner of his lips. "It's yours, cara mia, every inch of it." The days that followed did not belong to architects or mobsters. They belonged to auditors. Franco pulled every access log and camera feed tied to the south transfer deck and the service lift, and I sat beside him for hours at the long glass table in his office, cross-referencing badge entries, timestamps, and maintenance orders until the pattern finally surfaced. It wasn't cinematic. There was no tearful confession shouted across a warehouse floor. The betrayal existed first in rows of data. A subcontractor foreman who had no legitimate reason to be on Deck 12 the night before the failure, and the Rinaldi lieutenant who had quietly approved his access without routing the request through security. Franco didn't raise his voice when he called them in. He didn't have to. By dawn, their badges were dead, and their names stripped from the rota. What happened after they were escorted out of the building shifted into a realm of consequence that lived well beyond my job description and squarely within his. New crews rotated in under Marco's direct oversight. Every tether, every temporary rig and anchor point on the south side was torn out and rebuilt under procedures I wrote, and he signed. From that point forward, the structure didn't rely on trust. It relied on steel, math, and the unpleasant reminder to everyone on the site that betrayal carried a weight no one wanted to test twice. 6 months later, the Versiani Palace stood, a glittering, imposing monument to power and impeccable design on the Jersey coast. I stood beside Franco on the sprawling penthouse terrace, overlooking the illuminated cityscape and the sparkling ocean. The opening gala was a deafening success, teeming with the elite of the financial world and the underworld. My position was clear. I wasn't just the wife. A bronze plaque near the main entrance proudly bore the inscription, Architectural Design and Structural Integrity, Gabriella Foster Rinaldi. Franco, standing close behind me, rested his hands on my shoulders. I wore a tailored black silk gown, my color, my choice. And the diamond ring he had given me was not a symbol of purchase, but of partnership. They talk about the speed of construction, Franco murmured, his breath warm against my ear. They call it a masterpiece. It's a fortress disguised as a resort, I reminded him, my eyes scanning the skyline, constantly assessing the world for hidden threats. Structurally, it is perfect. But the most important structure we built, Franco, is the one right here. I reached up, placing my hand over his, confirming the connection. We had faced fire, steel, and chemical explosions. We had traded a runaway bride for an equal partner, and a lonely capo for a man who trusted one person implicitly. Our life was dangerous, but it was honest, built on the solid foundation of necessity and a shared, fierce desire for permanence. We turned away from the shimmering lights of the new city we had helped forge, walking back into the controlled silence of our home, ready to face the world together, as the true architects of our own destiny, the end.